Okay, hello everybody. We are back. Thanks for continuing to join us here, our event about transitioning out of academia into machine learning. We've heard some fascinating things from our panel, their advice and answers to a bunch of questions. And in the second part, we're going to talk about more concretely how to prepare for a job interview and how to prepare your job application. And there's a lot of questions in the chat specifically about this. Generally, how do you prepare for an interview? How do you put together an industry CV that's different from an academic CV? Whether to ask about salary in the interview, how to prepare for technical interviews. So keep those in mind as you answer, and I'll come back to them at the end if I feel like there's some dangling questions. But let's start first with Antoni. How do you suggest people prepare for the job application and the actual interview?
So for me, the job application starts with a resume of some kind. And you should always, I think, look at that together with the job description, right? And actually taking a step back, I think it all starts with you looking at yourself in the mirror and asking yourself, what are you looking for? Are you looking for compensation? Are you looking for a job in a particular locale? Are you looking for a job in a particular domain? Are you looking for a job that involves particular activities? And I think that will give you the strongest signal as to what to look out for when you're looking for jobs. I think if you go on a random job board and start looking for jobs that involve machine learning, I think that's a fairly ineffective way of getting what you want, and probably a sure way to kind of get yourself frustrated. So I think from that point of view, you should be clear on what you're looking out for. And then once you identify either likes or dislikes, that will help you to filter out different job postings, similarly companies. And once you shortlist a set of positions or a set of companies, try to learn more about what do they do and how do they make money, how do they deliver value, let's say, and try to make sure that you understand that. And once you understand this, obviously ask yourself the question whether that resonates with you. And when you're preparing for the application itself, but also for interviews down the line, try to identify areas where you strongly resonate and make sure that that's obvious both through your CV and through your conversation with people in the company. As it gets down to the CV, I can go into kind of more specific suggestions, but one thing I see often is that people talk about what they did, but not necessarily why it was meaningful. And think if you ask yourself the question of, okay, I was in a company for 3 years and I worked on 15 projects. Why was any of these interesting? Why was any of these useful? And because my boss said so is not usually a good answer. So if you can dig into that and try to understand the motivations behind things, and you can capture that in the CV, that is always a very positive signal for people that review CVs. And also when you start having a conversation with somebody, well, they'll come out, they liked it. Everybody appreciates speaking to somebody that's enthusiastic about anything. And then if that thing that they're enthusiastic about happens to be something that the topic of the call is about, that's usually a positive sign. So for me, it's trying to make sure that there's alignment. That's the main takeaway.
Mhm. Great. Jessica, what's your advice about preparing an application and for the interview?
Yeah. So I just wrote down a few things about how I transitioned my CV to industry. So as you might be aware, academic CVs and industry CVs are quite different generally. So in academia, you'll have like a list of all your publications, maybe a list of all your talks you've given and whether they were invited and stuff like that. So for me, like I had to basically rewrite my CV and like reframe it in a different way. So focusing more on the experience and why those things mattered rather than here's a list of all my publications. So for example, I think I already touched on this in the last session. One thing that's really important is you'll have a lot of communication skills. So rather than listing all your papers, you could say published X number of papers in peer-reviewed journals. Have you given talks to a wide range of audiences? Have you given public talks? Have you given like technical talks? Have you done any teaching? Also like your ability to like break down a problem and solve it, and like come up with a good approach to solving it. Have you done collaborations? Like, I mean, if you've been involved with CERN, you've probably done a lot of collaboration. Like that's another really valuable thing. Leadership skills. And then I also had a section on like my coding experience. So what languages you've used, There are also certain packages that are quite relevant to ML that are good to list. There are some things that you might not have from academia already, which are good to like get an understanding of. So things like Git, things like unit testing, they can be quite helpful in industry. Yeah, and then also like listing any ML models that you have like experience using. So yeah, so I kind of like, I got a lot of really good experience from an internship. So I would advise you to do one if you can, to try it out. And I think that's good to like prove that you can do machine learning rather than just saying, I've done all this reading. But yeah, I think we've already mentioned there are also lots of courses you can do for free online, things like Kaggle and Coursera. And also a lot of the good machine learning textbooks are available for free online as PDFs. So yeah, there's lots of ways you can learn. And also, I mean, this probably varies from job to job, but at least for my job, my experience was that it's good to have a broad understanding of like lots of different models. So you kind of have a toolbox of different models and you understand when a model applies to a certain problem. So you say, okay, here's the problem, which model is the best approach? So yeah, so understanding how different models apply is also good.
Wonderful. Thank you. Very helpful. Miroslav?
I think it's important to understand that there's some journey that your CV will take before it reaches the hiring managers. Especially for the big companies, very often the first person who will see your CV is not really a person, it's a machine, it's an algorithm. And I think it's really important to think about a format of your CV because these CVs are usually processed and parsed by some OCR algorithms. And if you have some crazy format or if you save your CV to PNG, it will not be able to read your CV correctly and find the matching keywords, and you will be just discriminated from scratch just because you chose a wrong format. Then if your CV reaches some HR workers, then I think it's really important to focus on an alignment with the keywords in the job description, because that's how the HR people will usually select the CVs for another interviews, just matching keywords from the CV with compared to the job description. Then if you're lucky and if your CV gets to the hiring manager, I think it's really important to focus on the personal impact you had in your projects and support this impact by metrics. For example, some examples like improve precision by 12%, organize even for 300 participants. And so I think the managers really like the metrics. So it's very nice to support your impact by the metrics. And of course, the best is if you can add some outcome, like you saved 10,000 per year on some costs or whatever, but I know it's hard at CERN to support your outcome by something like this. Concerning the certifications, there was a question about it in the Q&A session. I think it's very good if you have some professional certification from some of the cloud technologies, as in the CVs, there's very often mentioned like keywords like Google Cloud, AWS, and so, but it's not supported by any certification or any projects. It's just because someone saw a tutorial on this, so they put it into your CV. So I think it's really nice if you have some benchmark of how good you're at these technologies by doing some certifications. AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, every cloud technology has its own track in machine learning, data engineering, all those career tracks. So you can choose a track to follow and do at least some entry certification. I think at least from one of the cloud providers, and it's enough to support your cloud technologies knowledge. And also, again, emphasize the importance of soft skills. I think it's nice if you do some introduction to project management, for example, some certification in Agile, Safe, or anything like that, because it shows that you're really dedicated to move to industry from academia and that you're aware that the project management in industry works in a different way than academia, and it will help you to better align with the project management path of the companies.
Great, Martin.
Okay, yeah, just to go very briefly into these topics, of course, feel free to ask more questions or also after the event, reach out to me privately via LinkedIn, email, whatever. I collected a few, I think, important things. Some may be obvious, but yeah, I think all of them are important, and I hope all of them directly actionable, something you can implement. So one thing is, I think, I mean, looking for a job already starts with building a network, and you need to do that before you apply for a job, because then it's already too late. So you should already do that now, and not only build it, also take care of it, make sure connections remain, have your profiles up to date, and designed the right way so that it's useful for people, that it has the right buzzword so that the filter and search algorithms find it, all that. It's important. It also saves a lot of time because very often companies will approach you. You don't even, have to send your CV somewhere. It really helps. Second point, so we already had that. I think experience is super important simply. And experience doesn't just mean on the job. It also can be like your private projects and other stuff. We discussed it already. When thinking about your first job of the academia, maybe that's obvious, but I think it's an important point. Don't try to maximize salary or prestige or whatever. Already think about like the second or third job afterwards. This is where, you can negotiate your salaries, where you will be really, where you can then, with your experience, hopefully land a really great, more senior job with a good salary. Maximize the learning and the experience. So that means, for example, go for a job where you learn broad skills and where you learn skills that you really care about, really, so that, they will be helpful in your next dream job that you want to land, not some very narrow topic where you then, for the next thing have very few options or a lot fewer options. Yeah, about the CV, I could say a lot of it, but my most important was just one page, seriously. My academic CV, was it 12 pages or 16? I don't remember. It was a lot. I managed to put it in one page. I think you can also manage people, recruiters, they don't have time to look into more than that. For the interview, I mean, in our field, since, companies are really very actively looking for people, we are in a very good positions. All the interviews I had were really in a very nice and comfortable atmosphere, more like nice discussions, chats than any stressful event or assessment. But I think what's very important is be prepared. Know the company, know your interview partners. I always make that a point. You usually get a list of the names. You can research them on LinkedIn, which universities they were, which degrees they got, what research interests they have perhaps. It really helps in the interviews. And also have some smart questions ready. In every interview I've ever been in, at some point there's the question, and do you have any questions to us? And I think, yeah, it doesn't shed a good light on you if you don't have any, or also if it's just some, very trivial or even stupid questions. But if you have some questions that show your interest and understanding, I think that already leaves a very good impression. Yeah, finally about salary, because there was a question. I wouldn't worry about that too much. Typically, companies will be willing to pay a decent salary, not because they are so nice, but because they want to keep you. Otherwise, you will jump to the next company as soon as you get a better offer, right? And it's still very competitive from the employer point of view in our field. Actually, in both jobs that I landed in the end, I got offered more than I had asked for. So yeah, I really wouldn't worry too much. But also, I mean, from your side, so typically, at least my experience, it was always fair from the employer side. You should also be fair from your side. In the end, it's not like, buying a used car where at the end of the negotiation, you try to win and then you never see the person again, but you'll be working at that company. You want to, reach some win-win situation at the end of the negotiation. Yeah, that's what I had. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Gianna?
Martin, thanks for your great summary. My thoughts were exactly on the points that you were sharing, but I can also offer some different perspectives. I never applied to a job. I actually don't know if I have a CV, so thanks for helping me with this topic. But your first point about building your community is the thing that really resonated with me. So I think finding the things that I was passionate about and searching for communities of like-minded folks was very meaningful. So maybe 15 years ago, agile was becoming a thing, and I was like struggling with 3 years iterating on the same model at CERN, and I'm like, oh no, maybe that's a different way that I can do things. And I connected with folks with those ideas back then that were not so widespread. Similar to, from that moment, but also thinking of your journey, which was another point you mentioned, in like the second job and the third job. My journey was Brazilian consulting companies, great at agile, that later, exposed me into like a nice excellence spot to an American company that was expanding to Brazil. And this American company exposed me to the global market, which led to Spotify headhunting me into like a tech company, like highly estimated tech company position. And thinking about this like long term events. That's how I found myself and my journey to have evolved. And I'm continue in engaging with communities of like-minded professionals and aspirational professionals. For example, there's a global community called Women in Data Science. There's both machine learning and AI and data science, data analysis, and it's a mentorship area that like there's opportunities for mentorships, there's meetups and those things that can help you find your next job, or you can connect with people that can do something that is very valuable to mention here, which are referrals. Because, for example, my journey was a lot about headhunters reaching out to me because of my LinkedIn profile mentioning CERN and great other organizations. But also, when you expand your network and then you see that one of your connections is posting a job with machine learning, then you can ask them, hey, can you refer me to this job? This is something that I highly recommend. Work on your network highly, and the alumni network is also a great place for you to take use.
Wonderful summary. Thank you very much. So we have some questions in the chat that I think people would like to hear more specifics about for the application and interview process. Can people comment on their experience, starting with Anthony, about the technical interview? What was that like? Did you have to write code, solve brain teasers? What kind of things? What was the sort of the hard interview like in your case?
Yeah, and I can talk about my experience. So I was applying for a managerial job. In that process with various companies, there were coding interviews, which were in most cases a collaborative exercise. So you're given a problem and you're expected to provide a solution, but the other person is not there to assess you. And again, that's my experience. It can vary in different companies. But the other person is there to help you. And I think during interviews, what the interviewer wants to see is the best version of you, right? Whatever you're good at, they want to see. And then based on that, they evaluate, is that useful, valuable for our company? But if you sit there and you're closed and you kind of keep your thoughts for yourself, that's not helping do that. You can say 50 things, and if 20 of them are mistakes, but 30 were good, that's probably a good sign. And even if you say 10 things and one of them was actually good and meaningful, that's probably enough to kind of get them to think something positive about you. And I think in most companies, and that was the theme today, getting a new job is a process that involves a lot of learning. Regardless of what you've done previously, you're in a new company, and that new company has ways of doing things. So it's assumed that you'll have to learn things, but try to kind of enjoy it. So I participated in coding interviews. Another thing I participated in is in a system design interview, which was very open-ended. There's no right answers, and that is a place where very much you're asked to understand. You're asked to elaborate how you're thinking about a problem, and you work very much with the other stakeholders on solving that problem. And by definition, in these problems, very often you're given an incomplete request or requirement. Design me a system. And it's like, okay, well, what kind of system? What do you want it to do? How do you want it to do it? How often do you want it to operate? At what scale? How big is your data? What format does it come? And things like that. And so again, that re-emphasizes, and it actually relates to other things that we've talked about today, like soft skills and collaboration and trying to get to the point of what's relevant. And often what will happen in these interviews is you might have, let's say, designing a system that has 3 components, but one of these components happens to be something they have a lot of experience in. What can naturally happen in an interview, and in my mind, that's a very good thing, is you can focus on all 3 components at a very high level, and then you can deep dive on the thing that you're more familiar with. And in my mind, as an interviewer, that's not a bad signal at all. It just tells me that you're very strong in this thing, in this particular area, but you still were able to confidently talk about the other components that are adjacent to it. And so, to me, the interviews themselves are an opportunity to be curious and to engage with the other person. And don't worry about how intelligent you sound and whether you give the right answers. The main thing is to demonstrate that you're curious, that you can learn, and that you deal well with uncertainty. I think that's one thing that machine learning is definitely true regardless of which organization you work on. There's more things you don't know than you actually do know, and the things change. And so in that sense, if you can demonstrate that you can adapt to situations that you're not familiar with, and you can work with stakeholders to progress forward, I think that's as good a signal as you can send.
Great, thank you. Jessica, what was your technical or hard interview like? And what would your advice be?
Yeah, so I guess I've only interviewed for one job, so I have less experience. But the job I interviewed for, so after like the initial like soft interview, I had like an ML theory interview, which was kind of like, you know, making sure I actually understood ML. Maybe that was more important for me because like I was like, you know, coming in with like not much experience. So like for a more junior role, you might expect that maybe. Whereas if you're like more senior and you've proven yourself, you probably wouldn't have that. But yeah, and then I had another interview that was kind of like a coding interview. So that was like a pair programming exercise. So like I had someone sat next to me. And yeah, I think I'd agree with Anthony's advice that like, you know, if you get stuck, like you shouldn't just like shut up. And I mean, obviously you're allowed to think, but like you should like talk through your thought process. Yeah, make sure you like talk through what you're doing, why you're doing it, what your approach is. Yeah, and then I had another interview that was kind of taking a problem and like framing it as a machine learning problem. So kind of like testing like problem solving skills. Yeah.
And your machine learning theory interview, what was that like? They asked you how, stochastic gradient optimization works, or
Yeah,
what
exactly. Like lots of stuff like that. Just like trying to understand which areas of machine learning I was familiar with and less familiar with, like which ones I understood, which ones I maybe didn't really have experience in. Yeah.
Mhm. All right, great. Miroslav, how about you? How was your interview process on the technical side? And what was your advice?
I mean, concerning the technical interview, I remember a lot of technical questions about the metrics I used, metrics I would use if I could choose again. Differences between machine learning models, which are more explainable, which are less explainable, stuff like that. Also, a lot of statistics, if I remember correctly. Concerning the coding interview, I did have a coding interview, but I think machine learning roles are not like software engineering roles, so the coding interviews are not that hard. Also, for example, at IBM, we usually were giving homeworks to the applicants. So instead of having online coding interview, we gave them some very general questions like, here we have some data set of customers. Can you do some clustering, segmentation, whatever? And we were not only looking at the code, but also checking the overall outcomes of the task, like not only how good are you at coding, but also if you can find some added value in this and something like that. So I think this is extremely important if you get some task like this, not only focus on the quality of your code, but also on the general output of the question of the task.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. Martin, how about you? What was your experience with the hard interview?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it depends a bit on the kind of roles that you apply. If you're like more on the developer side or engineering side, I think you might get some more technical questions and even maybe some coding questions. I never got the jobs I applied to were more on the research side. I got some tasks, but they were always like to be prepared before the interview. Like for my last interview, I was asked to prepare a research plan for the company regarding generative AI, and I had 1 week for that. And yeah, could take some assumptions, of course, because I couldn't know all the important inputs for that. Yeah, so I think it depends a lot on the kind of role that you apply, for sure. Also, maybe related to that, as I told you, I didn't really apply for the first job out of academia that I got. I was just asked by them. And when I got it, actually, I kind of panicked a bit because, I mean, I liked the whole thing, but at the same time, I didn't want, like, to accept the very first thing that I get. So I started applying for lots of jobs just to see what the options are, but also to practice in the end, to train, because interviews is also something that you can train. Of course, you can train it in front of a mirror or with your friends, but best practice is always reality. So yeah, just apply for a couple of jobs and go to the interviews, practice, try, see what it's like. I think, yeah, may sound, I don't know if that sounds like a sensible thing to do, but I think it's very helpful to do that as well.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense to have some experience with the actual process. It's less scary and more likely to be yourself.
Yeah.
Gianna?
Yes, as from the perspective and experience of interviewing for companies like ThoughtWorks, Spotify, and EQT, I've seen some patterns on like the criteria for evaluating candidates in technical interviews, and I like to share it. So first of all, communication, how you can communicate technically in an effective manner. How can you also make a good quality code and good quality approaches? How did you make your assignment correct or wrong? Was it complete? Was it fulfilling all the needs from the assignment? Another important thing that interviewers are typically looking for is your breadth and like your depth of skills. And typically the interview is going to be, as mentioned before, a bit ambiguous for people to take some assumptions and choose a path. And they are going to be looking for those hints. But most importantly, the curiosity that was also mentioned, and the creativity, because interviewing many candidates, like again and again, sometimes it can be, you miss the novelty. So when a candidate comes with a very novel perspective on something that you've seen many people doing the same things again and again, you definitely stand out. So when taking a technical interview, if it's a take-home test, or even if you're live pairing, think on how you can be creative and how you can present something new that will open the eyes of the interviewers.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you. Folks are also asking about money, how to talk about salary. If they ask you in the interview, what salary do you want? What do you say? Martin already mentioned not to ask about salary in the first interview. This seems like a question on lots of people's minds. Let's start with Anthony. What are your thoughts about whether to bring up money, what to say if they ask you about your target salary?
Yeah, this is a tough one to address, because at some level you would trust that companies are fair and they will evaluate you fairly, but also they're businesses at the end of the day. And so it's not uncommon for companies to pay the least that they can get away with, kind of thing. What I try to do in that kind of situation is, first of all, know my worth. And that usually means looking around other companies and positions and so on, and try to build a picture for what these companies are willing to pay. In many countries, it's starting to become a legal obligation to post salary ranges for positions. Obviously, the exact compensation you get will be based on interpretation of how valuable the company sees you. But often you can find ranges for salaries, and I think it's helpful to build a picture of what others are paying, and try to push that conversation, I would say, as far as possible. It's a little bit what Martin was saying with the interview process. It doesn't help you to put something on your CV that then would lead to complicated conversation. And similarly, I think it doesn't make sense for you to talk about money when they don't kind of like you already. So my suggestion would be to at the very least, the way I address it is I say I'd expect to be compensated fairly. And then, you know, if I have made some research, I might quote some ranges, but I'll be mostly interested in making sure, first of all, that there's a fit with the company, and second of all, to understand how the company sees these kinds of positions and the ranges that they offer. It's a difficult question.
Yeah. Jessica, if you don't mind, how did you handle this in your interviewing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I mean, I was quite lucky in that the job I got, like, they just published a salary range, so it literally didn't come up at all. It just was what it was. But yeah, I guess I don't talk about it if they explicitly like asked me in the interview, like, what do you expect? And yeah, I'd probably just say I'd expect fair compensation. I mean, if you did want to know what to say, like, I guess you could go on Glassdoor to try and get an idea of like what kind of salaries you might expect. But yeah, it's definitely a really tough one.
Miroslav?
Okay, at WIPO, it's simple because all the salaries are pretty fine, so you don't have any space for negotiation. At IBM, it was a different story. I mean, my advice is to go to Glassdoor, check similar positions in similar companies, and just use this to evaluate yourself and ask that. I mean, concerning asking the salary questions by the end of the interview, I mean, of course, if you're doing the interviews in Google, Microsoft, and so it's expected that you will be like fairly compensated. Sometimes in the startups, there are big differences in salaries. So if you're doing the interview in the startup, I would maybe ask some like salary like budget expectations from the HR at the beginning, because you may lose a lot of time during the interview processes, and then in the end you will be offered like a half of your value. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I mean, you should have some idea of your value. Otherwise, it's very difficult. I mean, do research, check. I mean, other people in the round already mentioned that there are lots of sources for that to get at least some rough idea. But then, I mean, you should also simply know what you want, what you expect, right? And then ask for that, plus maybe a little more. That's always good to have at least some buffer for negotiation, but you don't need a lot. In the end, yeah, as I said, it should be a fair thing from both sides. If you have some rough idea what you're worth, and then you just ask for that. I must say, I mean, there is quite some differences between salaries in this field that companies are paying. I mean, really not percents, but sometimes even factors. So it's a relevant thing. At the beginning, I was often a bit annoyed when companies very early in the process when they bring up this topic. But in the meantime, it's almost inverse. I very often bring it up early on when they contact me on LinkedIn. I tell them, okay, sounds interesting, but you know, I would expect at least that. Are you sure you're willing to pay that? Then very early from both sides, it's clear whether it makes sense to follow up on that or not. And yeah, I don't waste my time. They don't waste their time. But for that, you already need to have some idea, you know, what your value is and what you want. At the very beginning, it's a bit more difficult, perhaps.
Great. Gianna, any thoughts to add about salary?
Yes, to add to doing your research on Glassdoor and looking at different job posts that might have some ranges, it's okay to talk to this with people around you. It's okay to ask, hey, what's your salary? What's your total compensation? When you build a trusting relationship with people in your network, they know that your intention is to, you know, get information about your own value as well. So it's something that I know the different cultures, different countries might take this type of questions in different manners. But for example, in Sweden, you can literally get to know the income of anyone, any citizen, just by paying $3. So it changes the perspective of like the secrecy of this information. So yeah, I would challenge people to actually talk about this, and so that you get to know your worth and again, don't need to anchor early on the salary. Expectation to be compensated fairly is a great perspective, and your value is also can be communicated on different offers you might get from different companies. So use it as well. I think that's that's how people do it, not necessarily that very experienced on the multiple offers perspective.
All right. So I think we have time for one more question, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on the question of apprehension about leaving academia. Now that you're on the other side of it, do you wish that there was a door that was still left open so that one day you might be able to return? Do you have like no regrets and never want to look back, and industry is a happy, fun, bouncy place for you? For people who are still on this side of it, a little bit, concerned about whether they might regret it, can you give us some perspective there from your experience? As usual, let's start with Anthony.
I think there's definitely some of that. But I think, for instance, the CERN alumni organization is a wonderful place to scratch that itch, let's say. Visiting CERN can be great. But also, I've had always very broad interests, and that's one of the reasons why I chose physics. And I chose physics deliberately, chose to be in academia for a while deliberately, and I chose to leave academia deliberately. So all of these things were done deliberately, and it's not to say that I effectively like to think of it as there's no point of regretting things. I think you've done things for the right reasons at the right times. Yes, some things might not have been optimal, but you always do things with the best intentions. And I like to think that once a physicist, always a physicist, even if you're not in front of a blackboard and writing equations. And I think that science and academia can take many forms. I think academia, I don't like think of academia. Academia for me is an institution, but more importantly for me, science is that curiosity of figuring out what the world around us has in store and how things work, and doing that with people and going on a journey and sharing your excitement and curiosity about things with others. These things for me are incredibly valuable, regardless of where you are. Personally, for me, they've resonated at the beginning, they resonate now, and my life moving forward will definitely have a component of that. Whether that happens within an academic institution or not is less of a concern. It's more of an implementation detail, as we say. But I do carry that with me, and I try to kind of engage in activities like this, whichever way I can. And if there's a will, there's a way, and life throws opportunity at you. If you're prepared to take them, you can make something wonderful. If you're not paying attention, it might be another one. So
great. Thank you very much, Anthony. Let's hear from the other panelists while we have time. Jessica, what are your thoughts about making the transition and potential for regret?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like I'm very sure that I don't want to be an academic. Like I'm very, very happy. Like I have no regrets. But I would say like it's not like the door's necessarily closed forever. Some people do go back. So like in my old, very niche subfield, I knew someone who left academia for a few years after his PhD, and then he came back again after doing completely unrelated things. So like if that really was what your heart was set on, like it probably would be possible to come back. It would be hard, but it would be possible. But it probably also depends what you're doing. Like if you go out and you do something very researchy, it's probably much easier to come back and do research in a different field, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Just briefly, Miroslav.
I think the great thing about machine learning is that it brings academia and industry very close together. If you look at the most impactful papers from machine learning, they're most probably from Google, Microsoft, Facebook. And so I mean, I'm the example. I moved out of academia. I went back to the academia. I moved out of academia again, and I don't see any problem with it. And I mean, I don't see any problem with me moving to academia again. If you're doing machine learning, I don't see any problem with it.
Great. Martin.
Yeah, so I also know of some examples where people actually moved back to academia, but I think it's relatively rare. It's mostly, I think, that people don't want to go back simply. I mean, work-life balance, also the salaries. Once you have it, you don't want to go back to the other side. I think that applies for most people, not for all of them. That's talking about like real full-time academic return, like as a professorship or whatever. On the other hand, as others in the round were also mentioning, you can still do research for sure, and even academic research. Like in my position, I'm supervising students, PhD students, master students, bachelor students. Also, a lot of people on the research side in my company, they are actually part-time lecturing also at universities. There's a lot of interaction that we have with universities. We are writing papers, as was already mentioned. I mean, the most influential ML papers are definitely by today not coming from the academic institutions, but from the big tech companies who have all the huge resources behind them. So
Okay.
yeah,
Thank
I
you very
think there
much,
are
Martin.
possibilities. Yeah.
All right. And Gianna?
Yes, especially being dropped out of academia so early, I do see a big aspiration of coming back to academia when my life objectives align with the academic life. So yeah, for now, it's also about like collaborating with research teams within the companies that I work for, attending academic conferences such as NeurIPS, KDD, and those and such.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks everybody very much for coming to this session. And thank you especially to our panelists who have spent their time to give us their personal experience. I think we've learned a lot about potential transitions from academia and from machine learning at CERN into machine learning in industry. Some of the lessons I learned today are prepare. Think about the job you want, what you're actually going to be doing. Think about the skills you might need there. Don't just naively apply your existing CV and your existing approach. Think about what this company is doing and how your skills might be relevant for them. And reach out to people already in that field. There's lots of people we know who have made this transition. You don't have to do it blindly. You're not the first person. So build those networks, get not just the connections and the referrals, but the experience and the tips. I think what we heard today is not just a lot of experience, but a breadth of experience. So different people giving different advice for different situations. And I think that really is key. So I want to especially thank our panelists for taking their time and sharing their personal experiences. I know it's not easy to talk about your specific life and your ups and downs in front of a large group. So thanks very much, everybody, to Gianna, to Martin, to Miroslav, to Jessica, to Anthony for taking their time and being so open and candid about all of your experiences. And thanks to the CERN Alumni Organization for putting this together. And we're going to stick around in the next a few minutes. Our panelists will hang out, and in breakout rooms, you can chat with them, you can do some networking, you can ask them some follow-up questions. On the Q&A page, there's still some questions we didn't quite get to. And so if you have a burning question, you're welcome to stick around and to chat with them. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks again, especially to our panelists.
Thank you. And I'd also like to say a big thank you as well to you, Daniel, for facilitating this session so brilliantly. Before we go to the breakout sessions, I just wanted to share, for those of you who are not aware of alumni.cern, so there's a statistic that I read quite recently, the most recent, in fact, this is something which is spoken about a lot in the world of recruitment. Apparently 80% or more than 80% of jobs are not actually advertised. They're found through people's professional networks. So I can only encourage you, I'm going to quickly show you for those that are not aware. We have the great platform alumni.cern, which a lot of you will be members of. Some of you won't be yet, but if you aren't, then we would encourage you to join. Diana and some of the other panelists also mentioned like-minded individuals. So what are the benefits if you become members of the alumni network? Well, you gain access to a network of these like-minded individuals who have a shared experience. So reiterating what Daniel just said, there are people who, the panelists we've met today, they've gone through this experience of having been in academia and moved to industry. Maybe they felt that sometimes we hear that they say that they felt like they were failing if they didn't stay in academia, but you can see that there is proof that that is not the case. So if you can connect via this community map, you've got different means to be able to search for people, and also using different filters. For example, you can search for people in different industries or with skill sets. So please do register, and please do keep your profiles up to date. That will enhance your networking experience. And you'll find that there's a whole host of members on alumni.cern who actually want to give back. So people who left CERN before the network was launched, who really feel that they would have benefited, and they want to give back to a younger version of themselves. We also have, under careers, we have a mentoring module. So you can also connect with mentors. You can find individuals on here that have experience that you're looking to, or they're working in areas you'd like to work in. We also have a jobs board. So for those jobs that are actually advertised, you can find that there are jobs that are advertised by alumni who know about the talents that are developed at CERN, and also companies who are also interested in recruiting from within the CERN alumni talent pool. We also have events. So Miroslav, he mentioned that it's good to have experience in volunteering to organize events, etc. So we have a whole multitude of events. And if you're interested in helping us organize some events, please let us know. We also have groups. So we have different types of groups for the collaborations, but also regional groups that span 3 continents. And then we also have interest groups. So we have an entrepreneurship group, a women in technology group. If you would like to create a machine learning group, then please don't hesitate, and we can help with organizing events. So also, being a member of alumni.cern, if you do go into industry, it's a means to help you stay connected. So please do join. If you have joined, make sure you keep your profile up to date. So what's next? What we're going to do now is open up our breakout rooms. So I think all of the panelists, perhaps possibly Anthony will have to leave, but you can contact all of our panelists through alumni.cern. And we're lucky because today we also have, with Martin, there are 2 HR people from Dynatrace. So you can connect with them in one of our breakout rooms. So once more, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I would like to say a very, very, very big thank you to, and I'd like to give you to all give a round of applause, please, to all of our panelists, and also to Daniel for so brilliantly facilitating this event. So a very, very big thank you.